Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. I do have one quick favor before we get to the video that you came here for, and that is very simply this. You see that little red subscribe button below this video? Go ahead, smash that subscribe button. It really does help me. It really does help this channel grow and my audience grow. So go ahead and hit that red subscribe button. And now, here is the video that you came here for. But let's start with what happened in Gainesville. Because like I said, I don't always plan on talking about Kentucky when I come on this show, but it has been one of the most surreal, unbelievable seasons that I can ever remember. 2 weeks ago, we were wondering if the kingdom was collapsing, if John Calipari had lost his touch. I was never the guy that called for him to be fired or anything, but I did wonder, has the game kind of passed this guy by? And even as recently as a week ago at Mississippi State, you're kind of sitting there saying, I don't think this thing is going to get right in 2021. Maybe we just need to start looking ahead to the 2022 season. Instead, they rally at Mississippi State. They beat Vandy, and then they go to Florida on Saturday afternoon. And Florida, for what it's worth, has been a pretty good team this season. They beat LSU last Saturday. They played Alabama tough for about 30, 35 minutes on Tuesday before they ended up losing. And this was the game that you kind of circled on the calendar if you're a Kentucky fan or a college basketball fan trying to figure out if Kentucky's any good or not. And he said, okay, if they go to Gainesville, if they get this win, whoa, buddy, this season is completely different. Well, not only do they go to Gainesville, not only do they get the win, they put together a dominant effort. They were up by as much as 17 with about 15 minutes left in the second half, blew the lead a little bit, ended up finishing the game with a 15-point margin of victory. And so the Kentucky Wildcats, all of a sudden, completely out of nowhere, where did this come from? They've won 3-0, but most importantly was this game on Saturday, right? Because I think you can look at the Mississippi State game and say, hey, this kid Dante Allen, he blew up, but is it sustainable? Then you beat Vandy, and it's kind of ugly, and you win, but it's by one possession. You say, well, those might be two of the worst teams in the SEC. When you go to Florida, when you go play a team that, again, beat LSU in the O-Dome last Saturday, you say, if we get this one, we're starting to feel good about ourselves. And not only does Kentucky get the win, but they absolutely dominate. And it is kind of, again, one of the most surreal things that I have seen in all my years covering college basketball and even watching college basketball, okay? I am in my mid-30s. I've been watching college basketball longer than I care to admit, probably encroaching on 25-plus years at this point. I don't ever remember a single team having a single bigger turnaround in a single shorter amount of time than I remember Kentucky this season doing what they did. Literally as of a week ago, 10 days ago by the time you listen, halftime at the Mississippi State game, you're wondering, is this team ever going to figure it out? Now they've won 3 in a row and are coming off a dominant win against Florida. So obviously the question now becomes, well, what happened? First of all, I think there's two really obvious things that happened. The first one is the emergence of Dante Allen. And I've talked about Dante Allen the last 2 or 3 episodes. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this, but this was, for the non-Kentucky fan, the Kentucky High School Player of the Year, averaged 40 points a game as a senior, and John Calipari just wouldn't play him. Finally, he gets a shot at Mississippi State. He goes for 23 points. He basically single-handedly leads them to a win, and it forces John Calipari to put him into the lineup. And since that Mississippi State game, he hasn't been quite as good, but there is a very simple reason for it. He is now the focal point of everybody else's scouting report. It was crazy because I was watching the Vandy game on Tuesday night or Wednesday night or whenever Kentucky played them, and Vandy is chasing this guy 25 feet away from the basket. And again, he is basically the focal point, which makes life easier for everybody else. So simply by him having the game that he did against Mississippi State, it makes it easier for everybody else. There are now driving lanes for the guards. There are less players around the basket. The defense isn't as packed in. And so when the defense isn't as packed in, it allows for second chance, third chance opportunities on the boards. And also, by the way, when you have more driving lanes for the guards, defenses have to collapse on them. You got to kick it out, and it is creating wide open three-point opportunities for everybody else. Kentucky went 4 for 11 from 3, besides Dante Allen on Saturday afternoon. Devin Askew, I believe, had 1, B.J. Boston had 1, and Davian Mintz had 2. But it's important because those were guys that outside of Davian Mintz, they were not hitting early in the season. And then all of a sudden, this floor opens up, Dante Allen hits a couple, and it gives them confidence like, you know what? I can do it too. So that is the first reason why Kentucky has turned a corner. Dante Allen has been phenomenal. The second thing, and not only has he been phenomenal, but it helps all the other guys on the team and on the court. Secondly, and this is important, Kentucky returned Keon Brooks on Saturday. And I think most of you listening kind of have an idea of who Keon Brooks is. But for those who don't, Keon Brooks is basically the only player on Kentucky's roster who played at Kentucky last season. Kentucky, we always know they turn over the roster quite a bit. He was the only player that played at Kentucky last season who came back this year. But the problem was he was banged up and hurt all preseason. And so this was kind of the one thing that Kentucky fans were, even in the midst of the losing streak, were kind of holding on hope to, was the idea that if we can just get Keon Brooks back, we should be okay. We should be fine. We should be okay. Let's say a small prayer because this guy is a difference maker. And I'll be honest, I don't think I ever said it on this podcast, but I don't know that I necessarily believed that Keon Brooks would make that much of a difference when he comes back. Well, your boy Torres was wrong. I mean, I was way wrong because Keon Brooks, his return, I believe even more than the Dante, well, I don't know about more than the Dante Allen thing, but equally with the Dante Allen thing, completely changes this team. First of all, he's a really, really good player. I looked at him on Saturday, the way that he plays on the ball, off the ball, the way that he runs the court, the way that he attacks the glass. This guy's an NBA player. And I don't remember thinking that he is an NBA player following last season. In a lot of ways, and I'm not the only one to make this comparison, he reminds me of P.J. Washington, who came back for his second season at Kentucky and ended up being a lottery pick 2 seasons ago. That's who he reminds me of. He can play inside, he can play outside, he can shoot, he's very aggressive around the boards, and he's a really good player. I think, 2, he is that calming influence that Kentucky needs. And this is something I talked about after the North Carolina game when Kentucky lost. Because if you remember, that was the game that North Carolina beats Kentucky, and Kentucky sends Keon Brooks to the post-game podium to talk about the game. Why was that weird? Because he didn't play, and all of his other teammates didn't want to go. And so it became this pseudo-big topic with Kentucky fans. Why is this guy going? But even at that time, I defended the move because I said, that is a leader. That is what a guy who is a leader in a locker room does. He says, my guys are down. My guys are hurt right now. My guys are angry. Let me go take care of these guys. Let me go protect them, and let me go take some of the burden off their shoulders. So now that guy is not only in the locker room, not only on the sidelines waving a towel, but that he's on the court saying, guys, come here, rally, calm down. We're okay. We're going to be fine. That is a huge X factor that you can't even possibly replicate because there was nobody on this roster, again, to take that role because there was nobody that had been with the program last year. Now, I give credit because I think Davion Mintz, again, the graduate transfer from Creighton, I think he tried to take that role, but I don't know that he necessarily took it in a way that Keon Brooks could once he returned to the court. Finally, I would say that Keon Brooks' value is not just because he's really good, not just because he's an emotional leader, but if you watch the game, it allows everybody else, almost like Dante Allen, it makes everybody else's life easier, right? With Keon Brooks on this team, it completely changes everybody else's role. Now, all of a sudden, those role players, the guys that were having to carry this heavy burden of being something that they weren't, they can just go back to being role players. Lance Ware can just go back to just banging the boards for 8, 10, 12 minutes, come out, grab a drink of water, and cheer his team on. Jacob Toppin does not have to be a scorer now. Same kind of deal. He can play that role. Even Isaiah Jackson, the top 30 recruit who many believe could be a first-round NBA draft pick, he's still all kind of tools at this point, and he's got incredible tools, but he is still very much a toolsy player at this point. And so when I look at what Keon Brooks does, it allows all those guys, it takes the pressure off them. None of them have to be a 10-8 guy, a 12-8 guy, a 14-6 guy. That's Keon Brooks' job, and he's going to do it really well. Now, down the road, could those guys want a bigger piece of the pie? Maybe, but I think now they're all doing what they thought they would do this year. They're all being the complementary pieces that they expected to be this year without the burden of being a superstar. So when you factor in the Dante Allen stuff and you factor in the Keon Brooks stuff, I'm just telling you, man, this is absolutely just a crazy season-altering moment in time with that win at Florida. And I've talked about this team quite a bit, and I don't always plan on it. But I do think that as I look ahead to the rest of the season, I do think this could be, like I just said, a season-altering type of game and a season-altering type of moment. I don't want to over-exaggerate. I don't want to overdo it off of one game. But coming into this game, I'll be honest. I'll just keep it real. I'm just going to keep it 100% real. I didn't think Kentucky was going to win this game because when I looked at Florida, what I said was this, is that, and really more so when I looked at Kentucky, I said, look, these 2 wins by Kentucky are nice, beat Mississippi State, beat Vandy, but those are 2 of the worst teams in the SEC, and the Mississippi State game was fluky even as it was. And I said, look, I think Kentucky can get back to respectability. I think they can be a fringe tournament team, maybe get to whatever, 17-10 by the end of the season, which would be 14-4 in SEC play, and then maybe a win or 2 if there is an SEC tournament. I think they can get there, but what I was also trying to be realistic about was that there were still a bunch of teams ahead of them. Tennessee is really good. Alabama, which we're going to get to in a minute, is really good. Arkansas, when they get Justin Smith back, their best rebounder, they're going to be really good. They got confident on Saturday. They beat Georgia by 30. They're good. LSU has dudes. Even Florida, like I've criticized Mike White. I thought they did a pretty good job considering their best player, Keontae Johnson, was out. And so I said, like, Florida's just the kind of team, older guys, veteran guys, confident guys, a couple guys that are NBA caliber players, they're going to give Kentucky problems. So to see Kentucky go in there and beat the brakes off of them, it made me realize if Kentucky can play like that, they can play with and beat anybody in the SEC going forward. Now, I would still say Alabama this week is going to be huge because I think Alabama's really good. Tennessee still probably with more veterans has a higher upside, so that is not a knock on either of those teams. But it's a reality that this whole thing has changed. This whole narrative has changed. And the one thing I'll say really quick, and I do want to get to Oscar Tshiebwe and some other stuff, I do think it's worth noting that there, like, 2 things can be true, right? Like, yes, people listening probably are like, dude, Torres, you were crushing this team 2 weeks ago. Now you're trying to be all nice. And what I always say, I do the show today. I have to react to what I know now. And I couldn't see this coming, right? Nobody did. But what I also think can be true to a degree is that I probably, when I look at the bigger picture, I probably should have factored in some other things that I maybe didn't factor in as much as I should have. And what I mean by that is that when I look at this Kentucky team, I do think that I did not factor in enough what this offseason did to this specific program, right? And it's funny because, I'm fortunate enough, in addition to this podcast, radio show, whatever, I do a bunch of radio hits over the course of the week and talk to all different hosts all across the country. And I was on Cole Kubelik's SEC show the other day, and we were talking. He's like, dude, why did it take Kentucky to get a while to get going? And I really thought about it, and it really hit me that Kentucky, probably more than any other program, was hurt more than anyone else by this weird, bizarre offseason. Now, to be clear, that's not an excuse. You shouldn't have been 1-6. If you had played Dante Allen, you probably would have had at least another win or 2. But I do think that was a factor in why this team started so slow. Never forget, as I just mentioned a minute ago, they only had 1 player returning who played any type of minutes a season ago. That was Keon Brooks. He did not play until Saturday. He did not play until January 9th, 2021, in a season that started before Thanksgiving. But 2, when you have that many new players, that many true freshmen, to not have a normal offseason where you're in the gym the whole time, where you're working out with your teammates, where you can hang out with your teammates outside of the building, that is huge. That is a complete game-changing, X-factor, difference-making deal that I think has to be taken into account when we look at why Kentucky struggled so much. And so I do think that as I look back and how critical I was, and the tweets are still there, I haven't deleted them, the podcasts are still on this feed, I haven't deleted them, I went after Calipari 2 or 3 times, and I think it was justified in that moment. But what I don't think is that I took enough time to really consider just how tough this offseason would be for a program like Kentucky that just frankly just had no continuity, had a bunch of freshmen, didn't have veterans. This isn't Tennessee. This isn't Gonzaga. This isn't the types of teams that started off well. It's not Iowa, Michigan, Rutgers, whatever.